67 years old, and the only time I ever came close to putting my fist through a wall was standing in my own daughter's dining room in Nashville, Tennessee, on a Sunday evening in September, with the smell of a meal she hadn't touched still hanging in the air. I cooked for 40 years, fed half of East Nashville, out of a kitchen the size of a closet. I know what it means to nourish someone. I did not know, until that night, that my own daughter could look at her 3-day-old son and call him a burden. But Denise did. And that was the night I drove home, stood over my cold stove for the first time in my life with nothing to cook for, and decided, quietly, the way I decide most things, that I was going to find that boy, if it took every recipe I had left in me. It took 8 years, worth every last one. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You are going to love this one. Now, let me introduce you to the people at the center of this story. My name is Earl Jefferson, retired chef, widower, born and raised on the east side of Nashville, back when East Nashville was the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew your name because your grandmother had fed their grandmother. And the debt of good cooking never expires. I have hands like oven mitts, scarred across the knuckles from 4 decades of hot pans, dull knives that slipped, and one deep burn along my right forearm from a grease fire in 1989 that I wear like a service medal. My left knee has been grinding since I was 50 from 30 years of standing on concrete floors. And according to my late wife Lorraine, my face looks like I am permanently tasting something and trying to decide whether it needs more salt. She was not wrong. It is just how the face settled. I built a restaurant. Not a big one. A little place on Gallatin Avenue with 12 tables, a kitchen you could barely turn around in, and a screen door that slammed every time somebody walked in or out, which was constantly. I opened it when I was 27 with $600, a borrowed deep fryer, and my grandmother's gumbo recipe written on a card so old the ink was turning brown. I ran it for 30 years. Fed construction workers at 6 in the morning, and church ladies at noon, and teenagers who could not afford anything but a basket of cornbread and a glass of sweet tea. And I fed them anyway because that is what food is for. Food is not a transaction. Food is a statement. It says, I see you sitting there and I have decided you are worth the trouble. I understand patience the way only a man who has spent 10,000 hours over a stove can understand it. You cannot rush a braise. You cannot shortcut a roux. The best meals are the ones where someone stood in the heat for hours because they believed the people at the table were worth the wait. I did not understand, until that September night, that my own daughter could sit at a table I had set for her and decide that her newborn son was not worth the trouble. Lorraine Jefferson, my wife. Lord, where do I begin? She was the kind of woman who could silence a room just by raising one eyebrow, and the kind of woman who could fill that same room with laughter 5 seconds later. She kept a recipe box on the kitchen counter, wooden, hand-carved by her father, filled with index cards going back 4 generations. Every card in her handwriting, neat and precise, with little notes in the margins, a little more cayenne than Mama used. Earl likes this one on Sundays. The last card in that box was one I had not read yet. I did not know it existed until the day she died. More on that later. Denise Carter, my daughter, maiden name Jefferson. But she dropped it the way she dropped. Most things that reminded her of Greece and small kitchens and a father who came home every night smelling like onions and hickory smoke. She married Terrence Carter, a quiet man who worked in hospital administration at Vanderbilt, the kind of man who agreed with whoever spoke loudest in the room, which was always Denise. She became a lawyer, corporate litigation, sharp suits, sharp voice, sharp decisions. She was good at it. I was proud of her. I told her so. She said thank you the way people say thank you when they have already moved past the compliment. She grew up in my kitchen, sat on the counter when she was 4, legs swinging, licking batter off a wooden spoon. By 10, she could make a roux without burning it, which is more than most adults can say. By 15, she wanted nothing to do with any of it. She was embarrassed by the grease under my fingernails, by the restaurant that smelled like smoke, by the father who could not talk about anything except seasoning and slow cooking and the right way to debone a chicken. She wanted clean hands and corner offices, and a life that did not smell like someone else's supper. I understood. I did not agree, but I understood. A parent's job is not to make a child into a copy. It is to give them roots strong enough that they can grow in whatever direction they choose, even if that direction is away from you. Lorraine said once, stirring a pot of red beans on a Tuesday evening, steam curling around her face, that Denise would come back to the kitchen eventually. Everybody does, she said. The kitchen is where the truth is. You just have to wait. Lorraine was right about most things. She was right about that too. She just did not live long enough to see it. And then there was Terence. Quiet, careful Terence, who sat at my table every Thanksgiving and complimented the food with the precision of a man who had been coached, who laughed at my jokes exactly one beat too late, who looked at Denise the way a man looks at a woman he loves but does not fully understand and has long since stopped trying to. I dismissed Terence for years, thought he was wallpaper, pleasant, inoffensive, ultimately forgettable. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about Terence in ways that took 8 years and a recipe card in a kitchen drawer in Knoxville to understand. But I am getting ahead of myself. Then Marcus was born. And for exactly 47 hours, the world made perfect sense. Marcus came into the world on a Tuesday morning at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, 6 weeks early and in a hurry, which I later learned was the only thing he ever did fast. Everything else about that boy turned out to be slow and deliberate and exact, like a man tasting a sauce and knowing it needs 30 more minutes before it is right. 4 pounds, 11 ounces. Small enough to fit in one of my hands, though the nurses would not let me try. They let me hold him at 9:32 that morning. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock on the wall when the nurse placed him in my arms and I thought, I want to remember this number for the rest of my life. He was wrapped in a white hospital blanket, his face scrunched and serious, his fingers curled into fists, like he was holding on to something he had brought with him from wherever babies come from. I sat in the chair beside the window, held him against my chest, counted his fingers and his toes, and thought, this is what 40 years of cooking was for. Every early morning, every burnt roux, every aching knee. All of it was just practice for holding this boy. I had brought gumbo. Of course I had. A quart container, still warm, my grandmother's recipe. The nurses thought I was ridiculous. I did not care. I opened that container and the smell filled the room the way gumbo always fills a space, completely, unapologetically. Cayenne and thyme and filet powder and the deep, slow richness of a roux that somebody stood over for 45 minutes without looking away. Marcus was 3 hours old. He could not eat, but he could smell. When I held that container near him, his scrunched face softened, his fists unclenched just slightly, and I thought, there you go, boy. That is your family. That is 4 generations of Jefferson women, and one stubborn man in a kitchen telling you that you are ours. The first thing that boy ever smelled was my grandmother's recipe. I did not know yet how important that would turn out to be. 47 hours after he was born, a doctor sat us down in a small room with no windows and fluorescent lights that buzzed like they were apologizing for what was about to happen. Leber congenital amaurosis. Both eyes. Profound and permanent. Marcus would never see. Lorraine squeezed my hand so hard I heard my knuckles shift. Denise sat across from us, legs crossed, face perfectly still, eyes dry, and I watched something close behind those eyes like a door shutting in a house you thought you knew. Terence sat beside her, jaw working like he was chewing something he could not swallow. The doctor talked about early intervention, specialists, children who thrive. He used the word thrive 3 times. Denise listened the way she listens to opposing counsel, carefully, strategically, looking for the weakness in the argument. I held Marcus the entire time. He slept against my chest, completely unaware that a room full of adults was deciding whether his life was going to be an inconvenience or a miracle. 5 days later, Denise called and asked me to come over for Sunday dinner. She and Terence lived up in Green Hills, south side of Nashville, where the lawns look like someone irons them, and the driveways have cars that still smell new. The kind of neighborhood that makes you feel like everything is under control. Nothing about that night was under control. Denise had cooked. That should have told me everything. Denise never cooked. Pot roast, and green beans and rolls from a tube. You do not bribe someone with a home-cooked meal unless the news is bad enough to require it. Terence opened the door looking like a man who had not slept in 5 days and was pretending he had. Denise was standing in the dining room. People stand when they are about to deliver news they have already decided you do not get a vote on. "Daddy," she said, "we need to talk about Marcus." I looked at the pot roast. Overcooked. Green beans from a can. Rolls burned on the bottom. She had tried and failed at dinner, and she was about to fail at something much larger. "He is blind, Daddy, and we have made a decision. We are placing him for adoption. Closed adoption. Private. It is already in process. I cannot build a career and raise a child who will never see the world I am building for him. We are not equipped. It is not a judgment. It is practical." Something happened inside my chest that was louder than her voice. A roaring, like opening an oven door and catching the full blast of heat that takes your breath and your ability to think about anything except the fact that you are standing too close to something that could burn you down to nothing. He is 4 pounds and 11 ounces, Denise. He has your mother's hands. He smelled my gumbo, and his whole face changed. And you are standing in your dining room calling him a burden. Silence. Terence made a sound that was not a word. His hands, folded under the table, were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale. I saw it. I filed it. I did not understand it yet. "The adoption is arranged," she said. "Closed. Private. There is nothing you can do." I set my spoon down on her table very carefully, so I would not drive it through her Green Hills window. Put on my jacket. Walked to the door. "Daddy, do not be dramatic." I closed the door behind me. Not a slam. Just a close. Clean and final. Like turning off a burner when the meal is done, and there is no one left to feed. I drove home to Gallatin Avenue through the Nashville dark, the September heat still pressing against the windshield, the city lights smearing through something in my eyes that I am going to call allergies and leave it at that. Walked into my restaurant kitchen. Every burner cold. First time in 40 years I had stood in that kitchen with nothing to cook for and nobody to feed. Lorraine was in the doorway. She had not come with me. She had known. The way a woman who has been married to a man for 38 years knows when the evening is going to end with him standing in a dark kitchen looking at a cold stove. "You are going to find him, are you not?" she said. It was not a question. "I am going to find him." She crossed the kitchen, took my hands, turned them over, looked at the scars and the calluses and the burn from 1989. "These hands," she said, "these hands have never stopped working for anyone they love. Do not stop now." I did not know yet how long it would take. I did not know yet what it would cost. I did not know yet that the answer had been sitting 3 hours east in a kitchen drawer in Knoxville in a recipe card with my handwriting on it for 8 years. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 60-year-old man learned to read with his fingers. The Nashville Public Library on Church Street offers a continuing education Braille course on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. $40 for the semester. The classroom is on the 2nd floor, down a hallway that smells like old carpet and copy machine toner, with windows that look out onto the downtown skyline, where the lights of Broadway blink like they are in on a joke you have not heard yet. The first night I walked in, I was surrounded by 20-year-olds who were taking the class because it looked interesting on a resume. I was taking it because somewhere out there, a little boy could not see, and nobody in his biological family had bothered to learn how to reach him in the dark. I had decided that I was going to be the exception. The instructor was a blind woman named Dolores, 50 years old, with the posture of someone who had spent her entire life refusing to apologize for the space she occupied. She ran that classroom the way I ran my kitchen. No shortcuts, no excuses, no sympathy for laziness. She walked between the desks on the first night, her cane tapping a rhythm that sounded like a metronome, and stopped at my desk. She reached down, took my right hand without asking, turned it over, and ran her thumb across my palm. "Your fingers are calloused but precise," she said. "What do you do?" "I cook," I said. She smiled. Not a warm smile. A knowing one. "Then you already know how to read with your hands," she said. "You just have not learned the alphabet yet. I learned every letter. I am a cook. I understand that your hands are your instruments, that precision matters, that muscle memory is built through repetition, and that there are no shortcuts to anything worth doing. I practiced Braille in my restaurant kitchen while the ovens cooled. I labeled every spice jar on my shelf in Braille, running my fingers over the raised dots while I cooked, cayenne and thyme and paprika and filet powder, until I could identify each one without looking. I practiced on the city bus down Gallatin Avenue, my fingers moving against my thigh while passengers pretended not to stare. I drove Dolores half crazy with questions. She eventually stopped treating me like an old dog and started treating me like something that had surprised her, which I suspect does not happen to Dolores very often. By year 2, I could read Braille as fast as I could read a menu. By year 3, I was dreaming in dots. Lorraine thought this was the funniest thing she had ever witnessed. 40 years I asked you to read a cookbook in French, she said once, laughing over her morning coffee, healthy and magnificent, and so alive it hurt to remember. One grandson, and suddenly you are learning a whole new alphabet with your fingertips. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. That is not funny, I said. No, she said, her eyes soft. I suppose it is not. I did not know yet that I had only 2 more years of mornings like that one. The private investigators were a collective waste of $3,500 and my patience. The first, a man named Russell who operated out of a strip mall office on Nolensville Pike between a check cashing place and a vape shop, took $2,000 over 4 months and came back with a folder of information I could have found on the internet for free. The second came recommended by a friend at church, lasted 5 months, and informed me in a polite phone call that closed adoptions in Tennessee were extraordinarily difficult to penetrate legally. I thanked him, filed everything, kept going. I attended every blind community event in Middle Tennessee. The annual Vision Loss Awareness Walk at Centennial Park. School showcases. Church services. Fundraiser dinners where I volunteered to cook, because standing in a kitchen was the only way I knew how to be in a room full of strangers without feeling like one. I became a familiar face in spaces where I was obviously an outsider. A hearing, sighted, 60-something retired, chef showing up with his calloused hands and his permanently evaluating face and his slow but genuine Braille. People were kind. Nobody had met a little boy who smelled like my gumbo. Lorraine died in year 5, March. The dogwood trees were just starting to bloom outside the hospital window. White petals pressing against the glass like they were trying to get in, and the room smelled like antiseptic, and the flowers we had brought 2 days earlier that were already starting to curl. Stroke. Quick and merciless. The way a grease fire is quick and merciless. The kind that takes everything before you can reach for the extinguisher. She held my hand on the 3rd day, her grip weaker than I had ever felt it, and said, "Promise me you will find him, Earl." I never considered stopping, I said. "I know," she said. "I just needed to hear you say it." "And Earl? Do not you dare stop cooking." I told her I could not promise that. She smiled, closed her eyes. I drove home on the interstate in the dark, and talked to her the whole way. Still do. Denise came to the funeral. Terrence stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. The whole neighborhood came. The church on Woodland Street was standing room, because Lorraine had fed half those people out of our kitchen and the other half she had fed out of her heart. Denise put her hand on my shoulder at the graveside and said, "She was the best of us, Daddy." I did not tell her what I was doing. Had not told her for 5 years. She thought old Earl had accepted it, made his peace, moved on, found comfort in cooking for the neighborhood, and keeping Lorraine's recipe box dusted on the counter. She did not know that every Tuesday and Thursday night I was in a classroom on Church Street learning to read in the dark. After the funeral, alone in the restaurant kitchen, I opened Lorraine's recipe box. I had not touched it since she went into the hospital. I flipped through the cards, her neat handwriting on each one, the little notes in the margins, the grease stains and flour smudges that made each card feel like a living thing. I reached the last card, the one I had never seen. It was in her handwriting, but newer. Written recently. Written, I realized, in the weeks before the stroke, as if she had known somehow that the kitchen was about to go quiet. It read, "The last recipe. Find Marcus. Ingredients. Patience. Faith. And your stubborn heart. Cooking time. As long as it takes. Serves. Everyone who ever doubted that boy." I stood in that kitchen for a long time. The burners were cold. The spice jars with their Braille labels lined up on the shelf like little soldiers. The dogwood outside the window was blooming in the dark. White flowers I could barely see but knew were there. I laminated that card and taped it to the wall above the stove. Every morning for the next 3 years, it was the first thing I read. The last recipe. The only one I had not finished cooking. Year 7 is when I started volunteering at the East Nashville Community Center on Main Street. They needed someone to teach cooking to visually impaired kids in their after-school program, and I showed up on a Wednesday afternoon in January with my own knives, a cast-iron skillet that weighed more than some of the children, and no expectation that this would lead anywhere except somewhere useful to be. I had spent 2 years after Lorraine cooking for no one who needed me specifically. Church potlucks and neighborhood plates are generous, but they are performances. I needed someone to cook for the way you need to breathe. I did not know yet that a 12-year-old girl eating potato chips on my prep counter was about to fill that space. Ada Williams was sitting in the back corner of the kitchen, feet propped on a stainless steel table that was not hers, eating barbecue chips with the aggressive casualness of a kid who wants you to know she is not impressed. 12 years old, small, blind since birth, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too large that she had turned into a personal philosophy. She tilted her head when I walked in, reading the room through sound and smell and the displacement of air that a large man carrying cast iron creates. "You the cooking guy?" she said. "Yeah." "You the kid, eating chips on my prep surface?" She considered this. "Your prep surface," she said. "You have been here 30 seconds. And I have already identified a health code violation." She laughed, sharp and quick like a struck match, then covered it immediately because she had a reputation. We were going to be fine. Ada lived with her grandmother on Shelby Avenue. Her mother was a concept more than a presence. Her father was not discussed. She took the city bus every afternoon and stayed late after the other kids left. We would cook and talk at the same time, which requires specific coordination when one of you cannot see and both of you are holding knives. She taught me things about blind cooking that no textbook covers. The way you memorize distances in steps. The way simmering water sounds different from water about to boil. The way garlic smells different at every stage. And if you pay attention with your nose, you never need a timer. I taught her how to make a roux. A proper roux. 45 minutes of standing and stirring, and believing that something that looks like nothing is becoming everything. She burned the first 3. The 4th was perfect. She stood at the stove with her hoodie pushed to her elbows, face tilted toward the pan, reading the smell the way I read a thermometer, and when it was right, she knew it the way you know your own name. The afternoon she made cornbread from scratch, start to finish, measured by touch and smell, and the sound of batter hitting hot iron. She pulled it from the oven and stood very still. "Is it right?" she asked. I tasted it. Crisp outside, soft center, the faintest sweetness. Not too much, just enough. "It is right," I said. She did not smile. She exhaled, long and slow, like she had been holding her breath for 12 years. Then she tasted it herself and nodded once. The nod of a person who has just discovered they are capable of something the world assumed they were not. I did not tell her why I had really started coming. I did not tell anyone. But kitchens have a way of delivering things you did not order. On a Thursday afternoon in August, 8 years and 3 months into my search, Ada said something between bites of cornbread that stopped my hands mid-stir. She had been talking about a summer camp for blind kids near Gatlinburg. Friends, terrible cafeteria food, counselors who thought they were funny. Normal conversation at 12-year-old speed, which is to say without punctuation. Then between one sentence and the next, she said, "There is this boy in Knoxville, Marcus. He is in my weekend group sometimes. He is weird." I kept stirring. My hands knew what to do, even when the rest of me had stopped. "Weird how?" "He can name any spice by smell," she said. "Any spice. You hold it under his nose, and he tells you what it is, and what to cook with it, and whether it is fresh." She paused. "And he says his first food memory is something he cannot name. Says it tasted like home, but he does not know what home means because he has never been to the place it came from." My hand went still. The spoon stopped. The roux was going to burn if I did not keep stirring, and I did not keep stirring because something had happened in my chest that I recognized. The same roaring from Denise's dining room 8 years earlier, except this time it was not rage. It was the sound a stove makes when you turn on the burner after it has been cold for a very long time. Tasted like home. 4 generations of gumbo, cayenne and thyme and filet powder. The smell I had held near a 3-hour-old baby who could not eat but could smell and whose face had changed. I saved the roux. Barely. Kept my voice level. "What is his last name?" Ada tilted her head. The angle she uses when she suspects something. "Why?" "Just curious." "You are not just curious," she said. "You have been coming here for a year, and this is the first time you have stopped stirring." I looked at this girl who could read a room better than most sighted adults and thought, "Lorraine would have loved you. I need you to trust me," I said. "When I explain everything, you will understand." Long pause. Ada chewed her cornbread slowly, which for her was the equivalent of deep meditation. "Okay," she said. "His name is Washington. Marcus Washington. Lives in Knoxville, with his adopted family." I finished class. Cleaned the kitchen, walked to the parking lot, sat in my truck in the August heat, Nashville skyline shimmering, the air smelling like hot pavement, and the last summer honeysuckle. "Lorraine," I said to the dashboard, to the sky, to the laminated card taped to my sun visor. "The last recipe. I think I found the last ingredient." I did not cry. I am not a crier. My eyes did something that was technically not crying. We will leave it there. I spent 2 weeks preparing, called around carefully, found the right channels, did not rush. Everything I had ever rushed in my life, I had burned. Then I drove 3 hours east on I-40 to Knoxville on a Saturday morning in September, with the laminated recipe card on the visor above me and Lorraine's handwriting catching the light every time I checked my mirrors. Knoxville in September still holds the summer like a cast iron pan holds heat, slow to warm and slower to let go. I arrived on Market Square at 9 in the morning, parked on a side street near the old courthouse, and sat in my truck for 11 minutes because I needed to be still before I could move. The city smelled like roasting coffee from the shop on the corner, and warm brick, and the particular dusty sweetness of a Tennessee town that has been standing in the sun since before anyone alive can remember. James and Patricia Washington were already at the cafe when I walked in. He was a tall man, quiet, with mechanic's hands, and the patient posture of someone who listens before he speaks. She was small, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who makes you feel like she has already read every page of you before you have opened your mouth. They were cautious. They had a right to be. A stranger calling about their son, claiming 8 years of searching, could be anything. I told them everything. All of it. The gumbo at the hospital. The word burden. The cold stove on Gallatin Avenue. Lorraine saying find him. The Braille classes on Church Street. Dolores and her knowing smile. The private investigators and their useless folders. The spice jars with their raised dots. The blind community events where nobody had met my grandson. Lorraine's death and her last recipe card on the kitchen wall. Ada and the cornbread and the Thursday afternoon that stopped my hands. 8 years compressed into 45 minutes of a man sitting in a Knoxville cafe trying to keep his voice steady. Patricia listened to every word without interrupting. When I finished, the cafe had gone quiet around us. Or maybe I had just stopped hearing it. She looked at me for a long moment. The way you look at something you are deciding whether to trust. And then she said, "Mr. Jefferson, can I show you something?" She reached into her purse and took out a recipe card. Index card size, slightly yellowed, the edges soft from handling. She set it on the table between us. I recognized the handwriting before I recognized the recipe. It was not Lorraine's neat print. It was not mine. It was Terrence's. Careful, deliberate. The handwriting of a man who had taken his time because he understood that what he was writing mattered more than anything he had ever put on paper. My grandmother's gumbo recipe. Every measurement, every step, every note, copied in Terrence's hand. And, at the bottom, in smaller letters, "This is his grandfather's recipe. His name is Earl Jefferson. Gallatin Avenue, East Nashville. If Marcus ever wants to know where he comes from, start in this kitchen." My hands went still for the second time in 8 years. The first time had been in Denise's dining room, when she said the word burden. This was different. This was the feeling of picking up a pot you thought was empty and discovering it is full. "This came with the adoption paperwork," Patricia said quietly. "About 6 months after we brought Marcus home. We assumed you had been given our contact information and chose not to reach out. We kept it because it did not feel right to throw away a recipe that someone had taken that much care to copy." 6 months. Terrence had known for 6 months. Had known it was wrong. Had known that somewhere on Gallatin Avenue, a man was standing in a kitchen with a cold stove and a promise to keep, and instead of walking into his wife's Green Hills living room and saying, "This is not something I can carry," he had done one quiet thing. Copied a recipe card in his careful handwriting and sent it into the dark and trusted the current to carry it somewhere useful. The current had taken 8 years. I am a patient man, but even I have limits. Patricia led me through the cafe and out the back door to a small yard where the late morning light was coming through a magnolia tree in gold pieces. Marcus was sitting on the back steps with a glass of lemonade, his face tilted up toward the sun the way blind people sometimes sit, not looking at the warmth but feeling it across the landscape of their skin. He was 9 years old, small for his age, wiry, with my mother's hands, those same long fingers that could find the spine of a pepper and strip the seeds in one motion. He was wearing a t-shirt that had seen better years and shorts with a hole in the left knee and sneakers that were untied because, as I would learn later, he believed that tying shoes was a waste of time that could be spent on more important things, such as identifying whether the neighbor's rosemary was the upright or the creeping variety, which he could do from 6 feet away. He turned his head toward me before I said a word, lifted his chin the way blind people do when they are reading the air, when they are taking in everything about you that eyes would miss. His nostrils moved slightly, not a sniff, something more refined than that. A calibration. Cayenne, he said. Thyme. And filet powder. He paused. And something under that. Cumin, maybe. Old grease. And cast iron that has been seasoned for about 100 years. He smiled. Not a big smile. A precise one. "You are the gumbo man," he said. The yard was quiet. The magnolia leaves moved in the breeze. Patricia stood in the doorway behind me, her hand over her mouth. I did not trust my voice, so I did not use it. I just stood there, 67 years old, with my scarred hands and my bad knee and my permanently evaluating face, looking at a 9-year-old boy who had identified me by smell, the way I identify a roux by color, by memory, by something deeper than language. We met 4 more times over the next 3 weeks. Always at the Washington house. Always easy. I taught him how to hold a knife properly. Blade down, fingers curled, respect the edge. He taught me that a kitchen does not need light to function, only attention. He designed menus in his head the way architects design buildings, structurally, every dish supporting the next, flavors load-bearing. He wanted to be a chef. He said it the way people say things they have known their whole lives and are only now giving voice to, casually, like it was obvious. Of course, a chef. What else would I be? On our fourth meeting, he reached across the counter and took my hand, turned it over, ran his fingers across the calluses, the scars, the burn from 1989. Your hands smell like cumin, even when you have not been cooking, he said. And they feel like someone who has been holding hot things for other people his whole life. Then he was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that a 9-year-old uses when he is about to say something that is not 9 years old at all. Ada told me about you months ago, he said. An old cook who volunteers everywhere and asks too many questions about kids he does not know. I figured either you were strange or you were looking for someone. He paused. The gumbo. The one Mama Patricia makes on my birthday every year from that card in the kitchen drawer. That is yours, is it not? It was not a question. 9 years old and already reading people the way I read a simmer. By feel, by patience, by knowing when something is ready. I was not ready. He was. He had been ready for a while. I told Marcus the truth on a Saturday morning in October, in the Washington kitchen with Patricia present, and a pot of coffee between us that went cold, because nobody remembered to drink it. I had prepared for every reaction. Anger, silence, the door closing. I had not prepared for what he did. He listened to everything. Denise, the word burden, the cold stove, Lorraine and her last recipe, the Braille classes and the spice jars, and the years of showing up to blind community events, hoping to find a boy who smelled like gumbo. 8 years compressed into 15 minutes of a grandfather, trying to keep his voice from breaking in front of a 9-year-old who deserved the whole truth and nothing less. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. Then Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a recipe card. The same card. Terrence's handwriting. My grandmother's gumbo. Mama Patricia showed me this when I was 6, he said. Told me if I ever wanted to know where I came from, start with the man who wrote this recipe. He paused. I have known your gumbo since before I could remember knowing anything. Every birthday, she makes it from this card. I did not know what the smell was until I was old enough to understand that food can be a memory you carry in your body, even when your mind has not caught up yet. I stared at him. This boy. This 9-year-old boy who had just unraveled 8 years of searching with a card he had been carrying in his pocket. Why did you not say something sooner? I asked. He tilted his head. That calibration again. Reading me by sound and smell and silence. I wanted to taste what kind of person you were first, he said. Before I decided. Taste. Not see. Not judge. Taste. The way you taste a broth before you commit to it. The way you hold a spoonful to your lips and let the steam tell you what the liquid already knows. One corner of his mouth went up. You are a good cook, he said. I will keep you. I spent the next year being Marcus's grandfather in every way that counted before I touched a single thing related to Denise. I do not rush important work. I season twice. I served once, Saturdays in the Washington kitchen, teaching him to debone chicken by feel, the way my grandmother taught me by sight. Weekday phone calls where he described meals he was inventing in his head with the structural precision of a boy who thinks in flavor the way engineers think in load. A fishing trip to Douglas Lake in June, where he caught a catfish bigger than mine, by feel alone, and was insufferably pleased about it for 3 weeks. I photographed everything the way proud grandfathers do. Naturally. No agenda. Just a man collecting evidence of being lucky. I quietly called my attorney, David Chen, who worked out of an office on Broadway downtown. Good man, sensible shoes, tells you the truth even when you would rather hear something else. We had a long conversation. I made some changes. The restaurant building, the savings, the equipment, every pot and pan and knife, and the cast iron skillet from 1981, the investments Lorraine and I had made over 40 years of 2-income cooking and teaching. All of it went to Marcus and to Ada, split equally, with provisions for culinary education and the purchase of professional kitchen equipment, because I knew what good tools meant to a young person who worked with their hands. Denise's name was removed without ceremony or apology. David looked at me over his glasses. You sure? I am sure. He nodded. Signed. Then I called Denise and invited her and Terence to dinner. Special occasion, I said. Just the three of us. Her voice on the phone was pleased in that particular way that meant she was already calculating. Denise always thought every gathering was an opportunity. This one was. Just not the one she was imagining. I cooked properly. Lorraine's good china out of the cabinet. Candles, gumbo, cornbread, peach cobbler. The full menu. The restaurant kitchen on Gallatin Avenue, warm and lit against the December cold. The spice jars with their Braille labels lined up on the shelf. The laminated recipe cards still taped to the wall above the stove. Denise arrived looking like a woman who expected good news. Terence arrived looking like a man who expected something else entirely. He had been wearing that expression for 8 years. The look of someone waiting for a bill to come due. We ate. Denise talked about a case she was litigating. Terence asked about my knee. The candles flickered. The china gleamed. Everything civilized. Everything surface. Dessert cleared. I opened my laptop on the table. Pressed play. 90 seconds of video. Marcus in the Washington kitchen. His hands, my mother's hands, moving across a cutting board with the terrifying precision of a boy who cannot see but does not need to. Onion, celery, bell pepper. The Holy Trinity. His nose tilting toward the pot the way a conductor tilts toward an orchestra. His face at the end, lit up, tasting the broth, nodding once. That nod, the same nod Ada made when her cornbread came out right. The nod of someone who knows. Denise's face. I watched it happen. The color leaving, the jaw loosening, the eyes doing the math. Those hands, that jaw, the way he tilted his head. My mother's hands on a boy she had called a burden and sent into the dark. Terence did not move. He had known this moment was coming the way a man knows winter is coming when the leaves start turning. He had sent that recipe card 8 years ago and had been waiting ever since for the bill. I closed the laptop, refilled my coffee, sat back. Let the silence work. His name is Marcus, I said. He is 9. He wants to be a chef. He can identify any spice by smell, and he makes a gumbo that would have made your mother cry. He has never once needed anyone's pity. Then Denise exploded. Behind her back, closed adoption, legally actionable. How dare. All the vocabulary of a woman who had learned to dress her worst decisions in professional language. I let her go. Sipped my coffee. Waited. When she stopped, I said quietly, You called him a burden, Denise. Her mouth closed. Your mother's hands. 4 pounds, 11 ounces. He smelled my gumbo, and his whole face changed. And you called him a burden. I want you to carry that word for the rest of your life. Every time you smell something cooking, I want you to remember that your son's only memory of this family was a pot of gumbo his grandfather made, because he believed that boy was worth feeding. I turned to Terence. He was already still. Had been still since the video started. You knew, I said. 6 months in. You copied my grandmother's recipe in your own handwriting and sent it to a family in Knoxville because you could not carry what Denise had done. You did one decent thing, and then you went back to your life and left the rest to chance. 8 years of chance, Terence. He did not deny it. Could not. I stood up. Began clearing dishes. 2 things, I said, stacking plates with the calm of a man who has been planning this menu for months. 1. Marcus knows who he is. He has chosen not to meet either of you. That is his decision. And it belongs entirely to him. You will not contact him without his explicit invitation. If you do, the Washingtons have a very good attorney. So do I. 2. I have revised my will. David Chen on Broadway has the documents. Everything goes to Marcus and Ada. Who the hell is Ada? Denise said. A 12-year-old girl who did more for this family in 1 sentence than you have in 8 years, I said. I hung up the dish towel. Neat square. You can see yourselves out. The roads are icy. Drive careful. They left. I stood in the kitchen. The burners cooling. The spice jars on the shelf. The laminated card on the wall. Lorraine's handwriting in the warm light. Lorraine, I said, to the kitchen, to the spice jars with their Braille labels, to the card on the wall. The last recipe. Almost done. In the months that followed, Denise started noticing things she had never noticed before. A blind man at the crosswalk on West End Avenue, his cane tapping a rhythm she had never listened to. A child in a restaurant on 12th South, eating with her hands because her hands knew things her eyes did not need to confirm. A woman at the courthouse reading a document in Braille, her fingers moving across the page faster than Denise could read print. The world had always been full of these people. Denise had just never had a reason to see them. She called me in February. I let it go to voicemail. She called again in March, left a message that was long and uncomfortable, the voice of a woman who had been rehearsing and still could not find the right words. I listened to it twice, did not call back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That clock runs on Marcus's time, not mine. Denise wrote Marcus a letter through Patricia Washington. Did not ask for forgiveness. Did not ask for a relationship. Just put it on paper. The guilt, the cowardice, the words she had used in a Green Hills dining room that had burned a hole through 8 years of silence. She wrote, "You were never the problem. I need you to know that if nothing else." Patricia read it to Marcus on a Tuesday evening in their Knoxville kitchen. He listened with his face tilted slightly upward, the way he listens when he is processing something that matters. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice as level as a measured tablespoon, "I knew that before her letter. I have always known. None of it was my recipe to carry." He sent back one sentence through Patricia. "I know it was not my fault. I knew that before your letter." He did not write again. Did not need to. Some doors you leave closed. Not from anger, but because you have already cooked something better from different ingredients, and the kitchen you are standing in now is warm and full, and yours. Ada turned 13 in April. I drove to Nashville and gave her a set of chef's knives. Professional grade, Swiss made. The kind that hold an edge, through 1,000 cuts. She held the case for a long time without opening it, her fingers reading the leather and the weight the way she reads everything from the outside in. "These are too good for me," she said. "They are exactly right for you," I said. "Do not abuse them." She looked up. Did the thing she does where the cool cracks for just a second and something real comes through. Raw and startled and grateful. "Earl," she said. "Thanks for staying late all those Wednesdays." "You stayed too," I said. She shrugged, opened the case, and ran her thumb along the blade of the smallest paring knife with the reverence of someone who has just been handed the keys to a room she has always wanted to enter. May in Nashville is the city's best-kept secret. The dogwood trees come back all at once like they have been rehearsing. The Cumberland River catches the light and holds it. The air smells like warm grass and honeysuckle, and the particular green sweetness that comes when a city decides to stop being winter and start being something worth staying for. The light lasts until almost 9 in the evening, long and golden, the kind of light that makes you understand why people endure. The humidity and the August heat and the ice storms in January. Because May exists. Because the kitchen window fills with gold at 6 in the evening, and it feels like forgiveness. Saturday morning, my restaurant kitchen on Gallatin Avenue. The gumbo is finished. Marcus stands across the counter from me, sleeves rolled, an apron tied at the waist that is still too big for him, but will not be for long. He made the roux himself. 45 minutes, stirring without stopping, his face tilted toward the pot, reading the smell the way Dolores taught me to read Braille, with patience and precision, and the absolute conviction that what you cannot see still matters. He lifts the spoon. Tastes. His face goes still the way it does when he is evaluating, when every sense he has is focused on a single point of data. Then he nods. That nod. "Perfect," he says. I take the spoon. Taste. He is right. It is perfect. The roux is dark and deep. The cayenne blooms at the back of the throat. The filet powder thickens it just enough. Not too much. Not too little. 4 generations of Jefferson women and 1 stubborn man, and now a 9-year-old boy who learned the recipe, Not by reading it or seeing it, but by carrying it in his body the way you carry a heartbeat, without thinking, without trying, because it was always there. You get that from me, I say. He grins. I get the good stuff from you, he says. The stubbornness, too. On the wall above the stove, the laminated recipe card. Lorraine's handwriting, slightly faded now from 3 years of kitchen steam and morning light. The last recipe. Find Marcus. Ingredients: patience, faith, and your stubborn heart. Cooking time, as long as it takes. Serves. Everyone who ever doubted that boy. I reach up and take the card down for the first time since I put it there. Turn it over. Find a pen. Write on the back in my own hand. The hand that has held hot pans and cold stoves, and a baby who smelled like gumbo, and a wife who smelled like flour, and a recipe box that smelled like 4 generations of love. Served, May, Nashville. Serves. Everyone. Marcus hears the pen on the card. What did you write? I read it to him. The kitchen is quiet. The gumbo simmers. The evening light comes through the window in gold. Grandma Lorraine was right about the cooking time, he says. What do you mean? As long as it takes. 8 years. That is a slow braise. I laugh. Cannot help it. The best ones always are, I say. He smiles. Goes back to stirring. The light moves across the counter. I look out the window at Gallatin Avenue, at the dogwood blooming along the sidewalk, at the city that raised me and fed me, and took my wife and gave me back a grandson, who reads the world through his fingertips and his nose, and his stubborn, beautiful, unbroken heart. I think about what I know now that I did not know 8 years ago, standing in a dark kitchen with every burner cold. I know that God does not waste ingredients. He puts every single one in the pot for a reason. Even the bitter ones, even the ones that burn, even the ones that take 8 years to simmer. I know that God's timing is not our timing, and that the meals He prepares are always worth the wait, even when the wait feels longer than a life. And I know that when God hands you a child, any child, whole or broken or blind, or hearing or perfect, in ways the world has not yet learned to measure, He is not asking you whether that child is convenient. He is asking you whether you are worthy of the recipe. Some people look at a child and see what is missing. I looked at Marcus and saw every recipe I would ever want to cook. 8 years of learning to read in the dark. 8 years of showing up to kitchens where nobody knew my name. 8 years of Braille, on spice jars and cold stoves and laminated cards, and a wife who wrote her last recipe knowing she would not be there to see it served. Some things are worth 8 years. Some things are worth more. Earl Jefferson lives on Gallatin Avenue in East Nashville, Tennessee. His kitchen light is on most mornings by 5. He is not hard to find. If this story reached somewhere in your chest that you were not expecting, you are not alone. That is what good stories do. They feed something in you that you did not know was hungry. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. And subscribe to this channel, because the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing, and the ones who chose wrong have no idea what is coming. As always, thank you for being part of this family,